It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. Now, you can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting if you just reach out to me through my email, oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Got some good content for you today. We have Keith McHenry, who is the founder of Food Not Bombs. And I've actually dealt with Food Not Bombs when they were in Vegas, when I was in Vegas, and we were very active out there. He's written this article on Covert Action Magazine called The Plot to Intern Homelessness. Homeless people. Okay? Now you can check out Food Not Bombs at foodnotbombs.net. He's written a couple of books. One is called The Anarchist Cookbook. Now, it's not the original one. It's not the original one with all the bomb-making stuff like that. This one has recipes in it, stuff, and a lot of organizational advice and theories and stuff like that. And then another one is Hungry for Peace, how you can help end poverty and war with Food Not Bombs. I'd love to hear about that. Now, you want to meet him in person, the 45th anniversary of Food Not Bombs in Santa Cruz, California, and it's on a Saturday, May 24th. And it's called Soup Stock, like Woodstock, but Soup Stock. Mr. McHenry, are you there?
Yeah, thanks, Ed, for having me. That's great.
Hey, long intro, right? I get out of breath when I do it. it's getting longer and longer. Before we get into Food Not Bombs and we get into this, there's an article you wrote about the interning the homeless. Tell us about yourself. Who is Keith McHenry?
Well, I grew up in the national parks, and I had kind of a yin-yang grandfathers. So one of my grandfathers, my dad's father, was a lifelong park ranger, and then my dad was a park ranger, and then I was a park ranger for the first 3 years out of college. But so that played a big influence, and part of that was the fact that that grandfather took me. He lived with the Hopi in Arizona, what's now called Arizona, and he took me and our family to the snake dances and things like that before there was electricity in the Hopi land. And then when I saw what Peabody Coal and the flooding of Lake Powell, because I was, I saw the ruins and everything before they finished Glentania Dam, and the power stations at Shiprock and so on. There was putting soot into the air. It was my realization of that in part made me the radical I am today. Now the other, and so that grandfather, Donald Edward McHenry, was a medic in World War I in the trenches in Belgium. So his perspective of war was, very up close. But then my other grandfather was actually OSS and CIA, and he he directed the most deadly bombing campaign in world history called Operation Meeting House, which was the firebombing of Tokyo. And he had the 63 black and white photos of that that he took from the bomb bay of a B-29 to show the progress of the firestorms and to know how many petrol bombs to load on the squadron the next day and how far they needed to go to continue to burn Tokyo. So that I watched him stand in his den in Needham, Massachusetts, on the phone, yelling at then Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara and his friend, General Curtis LeMay, demanding they drop the atomic bomb on Hanoi to send a message to the communists that we were so psychotic we would do anything. And he also shared that, so he was Harvard Law, Dartmouth College before that, and Phillips Exeter before that, and he was in a satanic cult. He never told me the name of it, but he was also very committed to the idea there was no God. And I particularly remember when he died when I was 14, and I'd spent the summer with him right before he died. He died of a heart attack, I believe, because he was perfectly well when I was living with him. That so at his funeral, which his second wife had at a congregational church, the pastor was talking about what a godly man he was. And being a 14-year-old high school student, I was like that is not true. That is a lie. He was in a satanic cult and he did not believe in God. So that's one of the things that makes his stories about being in a satanic cult so real, because I remember how angry I was that they were lying about my grandfather. Not that I was in support of satanic cults. It was just a matter of a factual matter. And so he also explained to me how he was involved in the false flag attack at Pearl Harbor and why they needed to do that and so on. And he was also very clear that the elections were designed to divide and conquer the population, that the intelligence community determined who was in power where, and that like that education between seeing the Hopi snake dances pre-electricity in the sacred lands of the Hopi, and the getting a education. He started when I was 4 years old, 5 years old, teaching me about real politics, and assumed, I guess, that I would follow in his footsteps. But then I was blessed to live in the national park, so I lived at the Grand Canyon, Yosemite, Everglades, Big Bend, and so on. And then eventually, my dad gets reassigned to Boston, the North Atlantic Regional Office, so I lived there, and that's where I graduated from high school, as Acton-Boxborough Regional High School, and that's where I worked 1 year at Fire Island as a sign painter for the Park Service, and then I worked 2 years giving lectures on the Freedom Trail in Boston. And so that was that, and I studied painting and sculpture at that time, and it was during the time I was at Boston University studying painting and sculpture that I became friends with Howard Zinn, who was a history professor. And it was his conversation at one of the earliest American History 101 classes that I attended of his, that he talked about the 1414 people, which was the number of people who were arrested and held for several weeks for protesting Seabrook Nuclear Power Station. And so that's when I hooked up with Clamshell Alliance and with the Coalition for Direct Action at Seabrook and started going to those blockades and attempted occupations of the construction site. And it was May 24th, 1980, I was at that occupation attempt, and one of my friends, who was a law student at Boston University, Brian Feigenbaum, was arrested. Back in those days, we all used aliases at protests, and we never brought ID or anything. And because the computers were not what they are today, you could get away with that. But Brian was nominated to be the spokesperson for the protest, so his real name was underneath his face in a TV interview, and that's why he was chosen as the person to arrest for assault of a police officer. And his charges were heavy, and the bail was a lot, so we found a person with a bunch of money who could bail him out that night. And so when we went to retrieve him on the way back to Boston, we discussed how we're going to pay this wealthy person back, and our idea was to do bake sales, and turned out that was completely unsuccessful. But at the same time, we had a moving company called Smooth Move. The van that became the Food Not Bombs van also was the van used for our little moving company, and a family was throwing out a poster that said, "Wouldn't it be a beautiful day if the schools had all the money they needed and the Air Force had to hold a bake sale to buy a bomber?" And that got us started on the street theater idea. And we were friends with the people that started the Living Theater, that did the Living Theater in New York City, which is kind of the theatrical philosophy that Food Not Bombs adopted, which is that there was the audience was also the participants in the theatrical event. And so we bought some military uniforms at the Army Navy surplus store in Cambridge, and then when we set up, we would take that poster, which we mounted on cardboard, and we would dress up as soldiers and generals, like fake generals, and trying to get people to buy a bomb, help us out by buying some of our baked goods so we could buy a bomber. And that was the why we celebrate the 45th anniversary of Food Not Bombs at Soupstock 2025 on May 24th of each year. In this case, this year, And that's because that was definitively the day where the 8 of us who started Food Not Bombs united as a collective. And it was from then on that we kept organizing. So the first chapter of Food Not Bombs in Boston still exists today. And then I moved to California in 87. And then when I saw Brian Wilson get hit by the train, somebody I had known, he was a Veterans for Peace activist. He was hit at Nuremberg Actions, which was blockading munition trains that were taking arms to ships out at Concord Naval Weapons Station in the Bay Area, and that those weapons were going to El Salvador to for that war. And that's when I was inspired to start the second chapter, which was in San Francisco. And that started in March of 88. And then in August 15th, 1988, 9 of us were arrested for serving free food at the entrance to Golden Gate Park, claiming we didn't have a permit. But it turned out we had applied for a permit, but no permit existed. And but this, angered the people of San Francisco, so we started having a weekly march down Haight Street, and eventually, over the course of 8 years, the city made over 1,000 arrests, and I ultimately did 500 days in jail. At one point, I was framed by the mayor's office and faced 25 to life in prison. But each of these events inspired other groups to start their own Food Not Bombs chapters. At the time, I had an answering service at a mailbox, etc., on Polk Street, and the poor guys running it, because it was $5 unlimited incoming calls. Well, they had to hire several people to answer my phones after the arrest, and they asked me to give that up. So I went and bought an answering machine, and my first flyers that I have a flyer called 7 Steps to Starting the Food Not Bombs, which is based on the notes I took for starting the San Francisco chapter. And I had in the earliest flyers, you could even get a answering machine so you never miss a call for your Food Not Bombs chapter. It's just so funny. And then there's a period where that I suggested that you sign up for MySpace, because in those days I was able to communicate with Johannesburg Food Not Bombs through MySpace, and so you can see that so now, for instance, we are in over 1,000 cities of the world, maybe even 1,500 cities, and 65 countries. And Johannesburg, I remember when they celebrated their 35th anniversary. Davos, Philippines, just celebrated their 35th anniversary. So it's like now it's this insane worldwide phenomena of mutual aid, where it's all volunteers and they collect food that can't be sold from grocery stores and bakeries and so on, and they make it into vegan and vegetarian meals that they share on the streets. And some cities do it every day, like our chapter here in Santa Cruz did it every day for the 3 years of the lockdown, the COVID lockdown, because all the indoor food programs were shut down. And but generally speaking, the chapters usually do like every weekend or maybe 3 times. Like in Houston, Food Not Bombs does it, I think, 4 times a week. So, it's like a worldwide phenomena. And then I was arrested and serving food in Orlando, Florida, when we lost a federal case there. And I think they made 24 arrests total in Orlando, and I did 18 days in the Orange County jail there. And so right now, for instance, there's an effort to shut down Dublin Food Not Bombs in Dublin, Ireland, which is really crazy since they should know better, since the English starved the Irish. And so why are they going to now starve their own homeless people? It's really interesting. But that's the history of Food Not Bombs. And I got to travel all over the world, visiting chapters, and I've hung out in some of the craziest slums of the world with our groups, and it's been like an amazing life. It's something I've done, the whole last 45 years.
Keith McHenry, I got to tell you something. I've asked a lot of people, tell us about yourself. That's one of the greatest little bios I've heard, man, and brings back so many memories. Clamshell, I forgot all about those guys. I was in New York back in those days. I guess I'm about 10 years younger than you. I'm 63. And I was with the Yippies back in those days, like 1979, 1980, with Dana Beal and A.J. Weberman, Darren Kay, the Pie Man, and all those characters, you know?
Yeah, I'm friends with all those guys. That's funny, yeah.
AJ's been on the show, and so is Joe Sacco, too, by the way. He's been on the show. And so has Brian Wilson's been on the show.
Wow. What a wild thing.
It's like a reunion.
A small world, isn't it?
Yeah. It really is. Honestly, it really is. But how old were you when your grandfather showed you those pictures of the firebombing?
Oh, I was like 4 years old.
That had to be traumatizing.
It was really crazy. And then the other thing that I have in my memoir, which I'm having some difficulty publishing because it's kind of big, and I think I'm going to break it into 3 books, and actually add more, you know. But I talk about how he had me, and he owned a farm or a big piece of property in Cape Cod, and we had a little blue dinghy, and he took me out there when I was like probably 5 years old or something to catch perch. And so while he has me kill this perch that I catch, he explains to me about how a white man's privilege and how I, when I grow up, I'm going to have to determine who lives and who dies. And it's not a moral problem for the people you're killing. They're just going to be killed. But for you, you have to be, you'll have to, man up, so to speak, because you may have to kill tens of thousands, if not millions of people, because the most important thing is to defend capitalism. And that is the only goal. And that's why the intelligence community that he worked for was hired. And so,
we got to figure out the cult he was working for. Okay. The cult he was a member of there, man.
Yeah, he never mentioned the name. It was certainly not Skull and Crossbones. He was very careful not to. It must have been a much more brutal Harvard University related cult or Dartmouth.
Well, you've heard of Colonel Michael Aquino, right? Temple Set. It was so I would think along those lines that they're both military.
Yeah.
Had that in common. Oh my goodness! Well, you got to definitely write 10 books, my friend.
Okay. Yeah, I probably will. I mean, I've got these 3 going right now. So,
what are we going to find in the Anarchist Cookbook? Explain that.
Well, the original Anarchist Cookbook, written by William Powell, was an attempt for William to stay out of the Vietnam War. And he just jotted down stuff that he found at the main library on 42nd Street in Manhattan. And he was not an anarchist. And in fact, he had a Revolutionary Communist Party member write his foreword for it. And his goal was just to have a bad name for a book so that the draft board would see it and go, oh, this guy's crazy. He wants to poison people, bomb people and stuff. So I was in correspondence with him before his death. And I said, look, I'll go on and rewrite the book. So it's about anarchism. And I would like to take your denunciation of your book and use it as the preface for my book. And he was happy to do so. And so my book is about anarchism. And it also does have vegan recipes for 6 and for 100 in the book. But it also has chapters on all the different, on the philosophies of anarchism over the years. So I've got something on, about the private property and nuances on that, and I have, those kind of things. So basically, the philosophy of anarchism. And I've been an anarchist, so I became an anarchist in the 5th grade. I had been a communist in the 4th grade because of Sputnik and the space race. So I was, me and my friend Gerald Flanagan were all excited about that. But then I read Walden. I read on civil disobedience in the 5th grade and that's what changed me. And so I've been an anarchist since that time. And I was really into the Yippies even during the, in 68, 69, all that period of time, followed them, in the media as much as I could. And then, anyways, I thought, and my problem was the first book I wrote, or the second book I wrote, the first book is out of print, Food Not Bombs, but the second book, Hungry for Peace, people they knew I was an anarchist and they knew I was feeding people, right? So they would buy the Anarchist Cookbook and it was like all bomb making stuff and there wouldn't be any vegan recipes. So they would complain to me. So my publisher, Chaz Buffet, who has C# Press, he, is an anarchist publisher. And so for years we thought, well, we should just rewrite the Anarchist Cookbook. And the issue, one of the things that was happening is a lot of Food Not Bombs kids were being framed by the FBI using the old Anarchist Cookbook, where they would circle the C4 directions, and they would say, see, they bought the Anarchist Cookbook, although in a lot of time, I think almost every time, the FBI actually gave them the copy of the Anarchist Cookbook and had it pre-circled around C4, and they would use that as evidence for why our volunteers were terrorists. We were originally officially declared America's most hardcore terrorist group on August 29th, 1988, by the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force in a memo to the San Francisco FBI office after they saw 24 of us being arrested at Golden Gate Park on August 22nd. And so anyway, that was, we thought, well, we're anarchists. We know about anarchism. William Powell wasn't. Let's rewrite the book. He said William Powell thought that was a great idea, or I don't know if it was a great idea, but he thought it, he was happy that I was doing it. And he was happy that I used his denunciation of his original book in the front of my book. And then Chris Hedges wrote the foreword to that book. And then and it does have a lot of basically practical anarchist information, like how to start a meeting, how to start a protest, how to organize a speaking tour, how to, along with all kinds of other things that, so basically DIY handbook. So you would be able to do all the organizing on your own. And so that was the goal of that book. And then Hungry for Peace was how the history of Food Not Bombs up until the point where I wrote it, and and how to start a Food Not Bombs, and the philosophy of Food Not Bombs, the three principles, and also the why we don't apply or accept permission to share free food. That it's our own, it's your it's not regulated gift of compassion.
It happens every night at the dinner table, right?
And for the government to try to control whether. See, that's the thing is like if they give you a permission to serve free food to the homeless, that gives them the power to withdraw their permission, and governments have no say on whether we feed the homeless or not. And the other issue, or anybody, hungry people or not. And the other thing is, if the government's so uptight about Food Not Bombs feeding people, like we were telling San Francisco, well, then you do a better meal across the street. Mm-hmm. You go get your permits and have a better meal, and then no one will eat at Food Not Bombs, and then they'll go to your meal. But the other thing is that, we have the three principles are that the food is always free to anyone, rich or poor, drunk or sober, or stoned or sober, and that there's no presidents, directors, leaders. That each chapter is autonomous and makes decisions using consensus, and actively has the people that are depending on the food to participate in the direction, forming the direction of your local chapter, and that finally we're not a charity, but that we're dedicated to taking nonviolent direct action to change society, so that no one has to live in the streets or eat at a soup kitchen. And so that's what binds the 1,000 to 1,500 groups worldwide together, is that we have very simple tasks and a very simple three principles. And, people can use my logo off the websites or anything. Everything is non-copywritten. And so it just can grow and flourish. And in fact, the Dublin chapter that I'm now reading about the city's attempt to create a permit process, I thought the Dublin chapter had disappeared a long time ago, and then it turns out that they're just as active as ever. That's another interesting thing in the decentralized global movement. Right now, for instance, we have 5 volunteers in prison in Belarus, and they're due to get out in the next 2 years. But the way things are going there, they could end up just being incinerated in a tactical nuclear bomb by the U.S.
So Keith McHenry, is there more opposition, like more people getting arrested today than there was 45 years ago? Is it getting better or worse?
Oddly enough, it's getting better from the perspective of getting arrested in the United States. And part of the reason of that is that we sustained 8 years of arrest in San Francisco, and it cost them hundreds of millions of dollars to try to stop us, and they failed. And I remember when they were going to have the Olympics at Park City, and the mayor announced that they were going to stop food not bombs at Pioneer Park. We can't have got to get rid of the homeless, just like they will do allegedly before the Olympics in LA, right? And so but then the mayor came back later and said, look, we called San Francisco, and we have changed our position on this, and we will not be attacking food not bombs because it is clearly not possible to defeat them, and it will just be a huge problem. So, and then we do have a really great appellate court order in Florida where this Judge Jordan wrote this beautiful. It would be better. It's almost be like the perfect food not bombs flyer, because he was, he said it's your First Amendment right, and sharing food in public is a right to assembly, right to free speech. Stop bothering food not bombs, and we've been using that. We actually used that ruling to defend ourselves in Houston, most recently, where they were trying to get rid of food not bombs in Houston, but now they've given up in Houston as well. So every chapter basically that comes under attack by the authorities. Same thing happened in Petersboro, Ontario. They tried to shut them down. Became known that you can't do that, and the city said, "Oh yeah, okay, we realize you can never shut food not bombs down." So see, that's the power of food not bombs. We're autonomous and independent of the state or in corporate power, and that I think is one of the key things under the new administration, is to have as much autonomy from governments as possible. Because the new administration is going to try to make sure there is no autonomy with their whole infrastructure that they're promoting. And it's going to be really interesting. It looks like MAGA is going to be pissed because they're going to do central bank digital currency. It looks like it'll be some kind of a programmable currency. By the end of the 4 years, that'll definitely have happened, maybe even faster. And then also facial recognition, biometric facial recognition. That's something that they will be pushing. And so, this is what Peter Thiel and Joe Lansdale and the others that took CIA money and started Palantir, for example. Palantir, I have a connection to Total Information Awareness, which was the government surveillance enterprise that was started after 9/11. And I pretended like I worked at a National Park Service bookstore at the time, so I used that email address to come to the Total Information Awareness meeting at the mayor's house in Tucson. And it was really fascinating to see what a bozo operation it was. And the mayor knew who I was, so I never got re-invited to those. But we were supposed to get like a lobster dinner and everything, and flashlights and little hard hats, and Al-Qaeda was supposed to drive down 4th Avenue and Tucson and gun down all the people smoking pot. And so it was like this insane thing. But anyway, so then Poindexter and the people that were famous from Iran-Contra, they made it a private corporation called Palantir, which is now directing, targeting in Gaza. And I guess they'll play a big role in the bombing of Iran here shortly. And they've been involved in the regime change war against Russia and Ukraine. And so out of that little group of people, you have Joe Lansdale, who he founded the Cicero Institute. And the Cicero Institute, one of its, I think it has 5 different things that it's pushing, but the one that I've been focusing on has been the homeless. And he's his philosophy is that it should be a crime. And so he's been advocating making laws against being homeless. And he's had a lot of success. And particularly, he's able to coordinate with Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, and mayors, Karen Bass down in LA and Todd Gloria in San Diego and the big West Coast mayors to get the Supreme Court to overturn a law, a ruling by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which originally was called Martin versus Boise, which became, and then the using Martin versus Boise, which meant that you had to provide indoor shelter to every homeless person in your community before you can criminalize them and arrest and ticket people for living outside. Now, quite frankly, all these cities ignored that, basically, but they lobbied the Supreme Court, and then in April of 2024, they overturned that ruling and opened the door for the criminalization of homelessness in America. And some of the laws that the Cicero Institute or Joe Lansdale were able to pass was, for instance, in Kentucky, there is a stand your ground attribute to that criminalization. So it's a misdemeanor if you're to be homeless in Kentucky, but also you can be shot and killed if necessary if you are not cooperating with the homeless sweeps. So a private individual who needs to get you off their land, if they feel that they must shoot you, they have protection by the state. Then those poor people in Tennessee, in Appalachia that got wiped out in the Helena, they are now felons because Joe Lansdowne was able to get a law passed in Tennessee to make it a felony to live outside in the state. So you have that going on. And then Newsom, and this is, I think, a very interesting thing. So 12 months before Newsom signs the executive order against encampments in the state, Donald Trump was in California, and he was advocating making it illegal to live outside in California and to force everybody into these large prison camps. Well, that's what Peter Thiel has been talking about. That's what Robert Marbut, who was the homeless czar under Trump, was advocating in those days. But what has changed between the first administration for Trump and now is the fact that companies like Palantir and others have created such an advanced AI system, relatively speaking, that they now believe they can identify where the homeless are. In San Jose, which is a town on the other side of the hill from us, they use AI to find the homeless encampments, and then that directs the police as to where to go to get rid of the homeless. And so it's a real possibility that some of the pipe dreams of the first Trump administration, now in collaboration with Democratic Party leaders, will be able to do this. And Peter, and you can see that, for instance, Joe Lansdowne's, I think he has $3 trillion under management, and so all these CIA guys like Peter Thiel and Alex Karp and all these guys, Elon Musk and everybody, they all have like these hedge funds, and that's where the dark money that they make either from selling drugs, running prostitution rings, or whatever other scams that they do. That's where they launder their money through that, and then they use that to promote their causes. And we've seen with Elon Musk posting recently that all the homeless are just nothing but mentally ill and drunk. So the dehumanization of America's homeless is similar to what the dehumanization of the Palestinians. When I was in the West Bank, I was kind of shocked that if American tourists could just come there and shoot a Palestinian, and it was completely legal. You can kill any Palestinian you want in the West Bank, and nothing will happen to you, unless the people around you beat you up. But anyway, that this.
Let me interrupt, because it seems like Keith McHenry. It seems like now this plan to deport the hardest working people among us, 10 million of the hardest workers, our neighbors out there, that we're going to deport them, and we're going to round them up and put them in some kind of camps. And then once they're all across the border, now we've got these camps up and running. We need to fill them, right?
Yeah, well, it's very fascinating. So the first camp, and I don't know how far along it ended up being built, but the first one proposed, and I think it is constructed, is at Camp Pendleton, and it was for 45,000 undocumented workers. There's supposed to be one at the Concord Naval Weapons Station in Concord, California, that would also hold another 45. And then there was reports by people that get bids from the federal government. They were noticing, so that this woman whose job had been to set up like camps in Afghanistan and stuff for the military, she kept getting bid requests to set up internment camps in the United States, and every state in the country was wanted anybody that set up internment camps to give a proposal. And that was about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago. And so it's not totally clear like how many camps have been set up and what exactly is going on with that, but that is definitely a proposal. And
I think Milley too. One of Trump's former chief of staff was one of those generals. I think which one? And,
General Milley. Yeah.
Yeah, when he left, he opened up a immigration detention private camp.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that's interesting about Joe Lansdale and these people. They all also are invested in private prisons. Yeah. And I get the impression that essentially everything will be privatized, digitized, and we'll live in a technocratic fascist nation. Now, the thing that's interesting about this biometric digital ID, the purpose of it was supposedly catch people coming into the United States, positively identifying them. But the only way you could do that, and I think a lot of the anti-immigrant people are failing to realize this, is that everybody has to be put into the matrix, because how can you tell who is a so-called legitimate resident of the United States and who is not, if we're not all in the matrix? And so I think, already you can see there's been a advance through the last 4 years, or even before that under the last Trump administration, there's been an increase in this. So when I came back from Mexico about 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, and where did I enter? I think I entered in Houston. They, I was like really, I had to catch a flight that was real early, so I was really out of it. And I walk up to immigration and naturalization or whatever it is, and they go, look here. And I'm like, oh, look where? And then bang, they take a picture of you and they get your facial recognition before you have a chance to even say no. And then, next guy does the same thing. So I think I had 3 or 4 photos taken just trying to get into the United States. And if I'd been like awake, basically, I probably would have tried to push back, but, I just kind of stumbled into it. And but that's what Facebook was all about. Yep. That's why the CIA started Google, Facebook, Twitter, all these things that are monitoring everything that we're doing.
And so I remember one time taking my daughter to Disneyland in California around 2005, 2006, and they had a thing where you could put your email address in. Again, and email was pretty new back then still.
Yeah. And
it would take a picture of your face. So now they got your face attached to your email database out there, Like,
yeah, it's going to get to be very, very crazy. And we've seen like, it's a shame. So for Joe Lansdale and the Cicero Institute to be targeting and collaborating with the Democrats. So this idea that there's like these, real distinct differences in these parties, it's really on the margins only. And but the basic goal of a militarized, always number one America type thing, where we rule the world, is shared by both political parties. I think a lot of people made fun of the fact that Obama and Trump were all high-fiving and laughing at together and everything at Jimmy Carter's when he was sitting in state at the Capitol. So because actually they all are in the same, they're in the same group, and that's one of the lessons my grandfather, my mom's dad, told me is that taught me was that the elections are to divide and conquer. And that the intelligence community just manipulates events. We can see, like with the Hunter laptop scandal and everything at the beginning. That's it's not like the CIA calls up and says, "Hey, you're now the president" or something. It's not so cartoonish as that. They just do things like they block information and they highlight information and stuff, which will then ultimately move their preferred candidate into power. And that's, when the day they announced that J.D. Vance was going to be the vice presidential running mate, then you knew the CIA was going to hunt the deep state was going to run. Basically, the Trump administration. He would be the spokesperson, really not the other way around. Now, I know a lot of my MAGA friends are, oh no, he's going to be able to control events and he's going to be able to tell the CIA and Palantir and stuff what to do, and they'll have to do it. But actually, that's definitely not possible. I mean, whatever the Central Intelligence Agency and the whole matrix of private spy organizations want, they'll work it out amongst themselves, and that will be the direction society goes. And it had nothing to do whether you voted for Trump or voted for Harris. It's all about what the system thinks is the best way to go. And I think because of technological advances, particularly in the area of AI and drone warfare and all those things, that a lot of the dreams of totalitarian rulers have finally come to pass. And so and that's where. So, when the Associated Press had reported that there was an 18.1% increase in the number of people homeless in the United States in the last 12 months, up from 12% the year before, a total of 33% increase during the 4 years of the Biden administration, they also included immigrants in that number. And you can see that there's and the Associated Press has very deep ties to deep state, so it's not, when they write things like this, there's an agenda. And I suspect there'll be a dehumanization of the homeless that will then be lumped into the dehumanization of immigrants. And it'll be very hard to determine like who's in these prison camps, whether they're only undocumented people. There may be homeless people that are in them with undocumented people at the same time, or maybe they're different sections or something, but probably not. They'll just be. So our we have the most liberal city in America, which is run, Santa Cruz, which is actually wholly owned by Google. They own and operate the city on their own behalf, and anyway, their proposal is to round up all the homeless people in Santa Cruz and put them in the Camp Roberts out in the middle of the, basically way away from any cities at all. In fact, San Miguel is the town that's nearest there. And if they let you out, from there, which they probably will at the beginning, there'll be like a little shuttle bus that goes into the 7-Eleven at San Miguel and back. So you'll have this appearance of freedom. But eventually, like they did here in Santa Cruz with our homeless shelter, they, used to be like every 30 minutes, the van would bring you from the shelter into town and then take you back, and then they would bring you in at 6 a.m, and then the last one was at like 7 p.m. Well, that just gets squeezed and squeezed and squeezed because of alleged budget cuts, even though we get millions of dollars. So we have like nearly $20 million in the last 12 months just to help homelessness in Santa Cruz. But because of the budget cuts, even with all this money, they had to reduce the number of times coming in and out of town, and they'll do that with these internment camps. At first, maybe undocumented people will never be allowed to leave the camps because there'll be a part of the camps that's just for undocumented people. But eventually that bus will never go to San Miguel, and you won't be able to go to 7-Eleven. And how different is that than a prison, right? So
they could just start a little company store there on the campground,
like one of these transnational corporations owned by some company that is on the stock exchange will set up a little store in your prison camp for you, and then eventually all you'll be getting is a rosary and Doritos. I've been there before. So anyway, this I think is a very chilling future here.
But wait a
Now,
second, because you promised me before the interview. I wrote down the word optimism, bro. You promised me there was some optimism. And we've only got about 15 minutes left, man. So let's get to that optimism.
Well, this is what I am finding really interesting because, for example, I was at Trader Joe's, and my friend there, I was basically laying out the same story that basically the intelligence community is controlling the Trump administration, the deep state that he was allegedly going to fight against. And he's like, "Oh no, you'll see, things will change." Then 2 days later, I'm at Trader Joe's, and my friend goes, "You're right. He's just another globalist." And and he was angry. What touched him off was the Gulf of America story and the taking of Greenland and Canada. And he was like, and then also the the whole argument about bringing in people with visas so they could work as engineers for cheaper for Elon Musk. I'm seeing a lot of pushback by MAGA people already, and he's not even in office. And so it's pretty clear that the Trump administration is going to implement the exact agenda that the people that voted for Trump were against. Solari, Catherine Austin Fitts and Solari, they've been warning like crazy that this is a possibility. So these are people that normally would be in support of a Trump administration who are already outraged by what is going on. And so there's what I think could potentially, what is optimistic is I think that, and we also see this with the Ben Shapiro being all freaked out by, CEO Brian Thompson being shot down in Manhattan. Right. And he was like all sad about that and very upset. And his comments were overwhelmingly attacking him for his position. And those are all like uber Zionist MAGA people that would be following his program and writing into his comments. So there's this unveiling of the scam that is happening. Then I have liberal Democrats who are now coming around to the idea that there is no difference really between Trump and Biden and so on. So I'm getting a lot of optimism from that community as well. So I think and then we can see that, like they did nothing for Helena. I think that eventually the Kamala mentioned something 4 days after Helena, and but I don't think they did any giant photo ops down there and stuff like they did. So when they had the phony terrorist attack in New Orleans, they're right there. But when it was like poor people, then nothing. So I'm thinking and then when you watch the videos and the interviews of people in Appalachia dealing with the aftermath of Helena, what you see is the American people pull together. It was a lot like Katrina, right? Where you didn't have governments helping and FEMA helping. I coordinated the FEMA, the food relief for Katrina for 8 months. Food Not Bombs was was basically the only regular meal that was down there for those 8 months in New Orleans. And in the local government, it was all just mutual aid. So what we're seeing now also in the LA fires, you're not seeing there's lots of ads for give money to the Red Cross, just like after Katrina, just like after Sandy. I was on the front lines in Sandy and Far Rockaway through that. We saw one Red Cross truck in Staten Island in the middle of a park while the Food Not Bombs kids are trying to pull debris out of a building so they could go back to cooking,
Yeah, my friend who runs the church down on Staten Island in Midland Beach, because he was a construction worker his whole life, his dad was construction, and him and his buddies they bought their own pumps, and they were pumping out everybody's basement. There was no one else doing anything, and people were donating all that money to the Red Cross for them to drive around and hand out water bottles or whatever. He says, you see the trucks driving around, they never get out.
Yeah, they never got out. And I was trying to deliver food to Far Rockaway. We had a setup outside the FEMA office, and a lot of the people eating with us were the FEMA workers. in Far Rockaway. We fed FEMA in Katrina and New Orleans. And they raised like $1.5 billion for Katrina. And we were able to send trucks in there back and, just at our own expense. I think we raised a total of $10,000, and we had like a panel truck that made like dozens of trips from my place in Tucson, Arizona, where I was stockpiling all. Because I had a landline at the time, and I was, so I'm trying to run my toll-free number, and I got caught. I still get people saying, "Wow, you were the only person that ever picked up a phone during Katrina," and so that's the thing is we're going to see this, the mutual aids, the Food Not Bombs process of how we're organized is actually, I think, going to be the preeminent way of communities organizing. We're going to deal with our own stuff, our own self. Americans are going to help one another. This like divide between, during the pandemic, we did every day. We did the meals here because all the indoor services were closed. I probably mentioned that at the beginning, but the thing is, the people helping me out were Republicans, and because they were ignoring, even though, and they were pissed at warp speed being introduced by Trump, right? So the thing is, these are like salt of the earth people. They're not like, like Ron runs an auto repair shop, and he can fix any vehicle in the world, and he fixed homeless people's vehicles for free, so they don't lose their vehicle that they're living in. That he's a Republican. He voted for Trump even though he didn't like Trump. This is what I'm finding. The American people will wake up to the fact that this like left-right divide was a creation of the intelligence community and boosted by the intelligence community using social media and the legacy media and so on.
Cambridge Analytica.
But in reality, we are all one people, and we should, this hate that is being promoted by the intelligence community and mainstream media and so on is not the actual reality of the people of the United States. And it's also when I travel abroad, people don't dislike Americans. They realize our government is what's dividing and conquering us, and is what is instituting all these brutal policies of genocide. There's virtually no one. I mean, people in these calls, I get 20 calls a day, sometimes as few as 10, from from seniors who did Medicare Advantage, and they were given a $100 gift certificate by United Health if they signed up for their program. So then when the $100 runs out, they call the number on the back, and then United Health Care person then gives them my number for home delivery for food. Just before we were on, I got somebody called me from Mississippi wanting me to give them gas money, and so these are all through. It's a total failed system, and I would say like if I get 10 calls in a day, like 3 of them will be angry that we're giving all our money to Ukraine or to Ukraine and Israel. More Ukraine than Israel, because I think a lot of them watch Fox TV. But anyway, they're angry that our money is going to wars, and we just gave another $8 billion in arms to Israel and another $800 million in arms to Ukraine. And this happens every day. These announcements of money, and yet we don't see any help here in the United States. So I think it is a very optimistic time. If you're an anarchist, this is anarchist heaven. Because the authorities are completely, all they can do is police state stuff and wars. They can't actually help the regular people, and I think the regular people are waking up to how scammed we are by the people in power.
Okay, we've been talking to Keith McHenry, the founder of Food Not Bombs. I forgot to mention his blog, which is called Anarchist Cook Blog. The article we've been talking about today is The Plot to Intern Homeless. You can meet him in person, which would be great to shake this guy's hand and thank him for his service for this country, man, and what he's done around the world. On the 45th concert of Santa Cruz, it's on Saturday, May 24th, and it's called Soup Stock. Now, how do you raise money for Food Not Bombs? If people want to support Keith McHenry right now after they I hang up on the phone, what would they do?
Well, go to foodnotbombs.net, and go to the donate page, and there's a bunch of ways to donate. Sadly, the most effective way is like people donating $5 and $10 and occasionally $100 on PayPal, Peter Thiel's program, and also his other program, Venmo.
Yeah.
But you can actually just send checks and money orders to the Santa Cruz group, and then we distribute it around all over the world. So for recently, we've been funding the volcanic eruption relief efforts in the Philippines, and we've been getting money to the Beirut food not bombs to deal with the crisis that's happening there. And so it gets spread around, and then we've had chapters in the United States. People will then put a note, we want this donated for the local chapter in whatever their town is, or it just goes into the general pot, and then we just send it out to the chapters to make sure everybody happens. But the reality is that we're all volunteer. We have no paid staff, and the food is largely free because it's recovered. So the thing that we're paying for mostly is, to buy gas to drive around to pick up the food, and in some cities we're paying rent for kitchens because depending on the amount of people that we're having to feed in those cities. And, and it's for things like that, direct, maybe buying rice and beans if we can't get the dry goods donated, which is common, and then condiments and things like that. So it's really a very, money is not the focus of Food Not Bombs. And I think actually we end up getting more donations because I never sent out a fundraising email to anywhere. Very rarely. I think I did a little thing on Cyber Tuesday or something, but we're about when I get money in Santa Cruz for Santa Cruz Food Not Bombs, I then drive to Big Five and I buy them out of all their tents and all their sleeping bags that are on sale, and that's what we do with our money. We immediately use the money to deal with the next exact thing that needs to be. We don't want money in a bank account somewhere. We want objects that are helping poor people and homeless people. And so that it just immediately does that. That's what we do.
Well, Keith McHenry, I can't thank you enough. You really did make me feel better. I feel optimistic. I've captured I've caught on to your enthusiasm. If people want to, once again, foodnotbombs.net, check that out. anarchistcook.blog. If you want to meet him in person, up there at Santa Cruz on Saturday, May 24th, soup stock, and all this stuff. And Mr. McHenry, if you ever need to promote anything, whatever you got, give me a call. We'll put you right back on the air. I can't tell you how much you've encouraged me today. Okay, I've been having a rough week, as you know yourself.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, it's been a rough week, that's for sure. Well, thank you, Ed, so much for having me on, and I look forward to sharing this, this podcast on my social media.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, my friend.
Beautiful. Take care, Ed. Bye-bye.
Good night.